So, everyone, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. And those colleagues and guests that are joining us in person here today, despite all the cyclones, Merlin mentioned them earlier, the sun is shining now, and we've had a great morning with the Quilt Symposium. So those of you who attended that, we're now shifting gear a little bit to the New South Wales Higher Education Symposium. And we also would like to welcome our colleagues and friends who are joining us online today. So welcome everyone, hello. My name is Professor Patsy Polly and I'm the Director of the UNSW Scientia Education Academy. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge country. And I'd like to acknowledge the Bedegal people who are the traditional custodians and the first educators of the unceded land on which we have gathered. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are present here today. And what you see up on screen is this wonderful installation that we have here on our UNSW campus in Kensington. If you have time, please go ahead and have a look at it. It's just spectacular, especially at night. So, the summit, the New South Wales Higher Education Summit, is again hosted by the UNSW Scientia Education Academy, which comprises of approximately 40 fellows appointed across all faculties at UNSW. The Academy provides us with a platform for cultivating thought leadership and inspiring educational excellence at UNSW and beyond. Through our activities and events, we raise important current issues and spark high-level conversations about the future of learning, teaching and higher education. We're in our third year, and this event has certainly grown and gained popularity, which we are delighted about. This year presented an opportunity to merge or be integrated with the Quilt Symposium, which was run by our DVC Academic Quality Professor Merlin Crosley and colleagues. So we thought this would work perfectly because our theme this year is belonging and wellbeing. We've had close to 500 registrants online and in person, and we have approximately 70 institutions joining us this afternoon. We hope the networking sessions will enable those who are here in person to connect across these various organisations and with our UNSW colleagues. Now, for some housekeeping. The bathrooms can be found outside the doors to the left of the bar counter. And in case of an emergency, please do not follow me. There are staff here who are far well equipped to guide you through. As always, our event is being live streamed and will be recorded, and the link will be sent through. So, the summit overview. We're much looking forward to hearing from our wonderful guests who are expert scholars and practitioners. As in previous years, we will start with 2 keynote speakers, followed by a 35-minute facilitated networking break, and I'll explain that a little bit more when we come to that break. We'll then have our panel discussion, which will be followed by the second networking session. All questions will be captured using Slido, and the code is shown on the table in which you're sitting. So, I now welcome to the stage our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Education and Student Experience, Professor Sarah Madison, who's a great supporter and co-host of this event and sponsor, and who's been here now. This is your anniversary, 2 years. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thanks so much, Patsy, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I think 2 years ago, I'd been here for like a week or something. So anyway, now I'm old hat at this. So for this year's New South Wales Higher Education Summit, the theme is student wellbeing and belonging. Belonging and wellbeing have become formal priorities for many universities and higher education providers, and really all the way from primary school through to higher education, who have embedded these into their strategies, and we can see a really wide range of activities and interventions throughout our institutes and across the entire student life cycle. Excuse me. Belonging is notoriously difficult to pinpoint, but it's often described as a feeling of emotional attachment. It's also in the third tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and failure to belong is often aligned with poor health and lack of well-being. So obviously having a sense of belonging is assumed to be the counter. There are many studies that have pointed to the criticality of belonging, especially during times of hyper-complexity and rapid change, and I think we feel like we're in one of those at the moment, to support students' well-being and in turn their persistence and success at university. Tinto's research in 1993 and many, many studies that followed really demonstrate that sense of belonging for students, or lack thereof, can have a significant positive or negative impact on their transition and retention, learning outcomes, engagement, well-being and organisational advocacy, which to the universities becomes quite critical when we talk about our alumni. The University's Accord speaks to wellbeing mainly as it relates to student safety, and this morning we heard from Ben Rimmer from the Department of Education about the government's focus on productivity and the goal of an 80% higher education attainment nationally, and acknowledged that this critically depends on the student experience, which speaks to belonging and wellbeing. We also heard that the Quilt SES indicates that students' sense of belonging to their institution is highly associated with ratings overall of their educational experience, but also acknowledges that there's a wide range of both internal and external factors. And we had a UNSW student panel that really reiterated this, and that sense of belonging is really multifaceted. And we know that all of our university councils, and I can definitely tell you this is true of the UNSW University Council, care deeply about belonging and student experience. But regardless of what the government or our university councils want of us, as educators and leaders, we are all deeply passionate about empowering our students to succeed, to thrive in our classrooms, and to grow to become amazing humans, and often they already are when they come to us, who will make a positive impact in their local communities, across businesses and society more broadly. We care about our students' well-being and sincerely want to create a sense of belonging, but it is tricky. And so we thought that it was time for us all to come together as a community of educators, learners and thinkers and discuss this critical issue. So I hope you have an awesome afternoon. Thanks, folks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. So let me introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Chi Baek, from the University of Melbourne. Chi Baek is a Professor of Higher Education in the Melbourne Centre for the Study of Higher Education. Her research explores factors influencing the educational experiences and outcomes of students from diverse backgrounds in higher education. She has led major funded studies that have contributed to informing institutional policies and practices, including national projects on the first-year experience, international student engagement and student mental well-being. She's currently leading an interdisciplinary Australian Research Council discovery project investigating alterable factors that impact student mental health and wellbeing in Australia's universities. In addition to leading the Student Experience in Higher Education Research Group and supervising doctoral candidates, much of Chi's work at the CSHE focuses on the development of programs and resources to promote and recognise effective university teaching and to improve student engagement. She runs professional development programs in teaching and learning for academic staff and currently coordinates the CSHE's flagship award course, the Graduate Certificate in University Teaching. Chi, come and join us on stage. So the title of Chi's talk is What Shapes Student Wellbeing? Insights from Recent Research.
Thanks so much, Patsy, for the warm welcome and also for the invitation to join you today at your Higher Education Summit on a theme that is close to my heart and I think fundamental to the quality of students' experiences and their outcomes, and that's student wellbeing as well as belonging. Wellbeing is closely associated to the other side of psychological distress or mental health, but I'm not coming to this as a mental health expert, but rather as a higher education researcher and educator, as Patsy said, whose work focuses on trying to understand what are the factors that supports and enables students to do well and progress in higher education, and then what are those that perhaps undermine or thwart their progress and success. And I came to the topic of mental health and wellbeing actually 14 or 15 years ago because of the concerns raised by academic colleagues at my university who were noticing in their classes and in their cohorts growing rates of students coming to them in distress, students' disengagement, students' isolation, and a lot of the work in this area, early work, was really driven by those academics at the coalface of teaching. And I just want to acknowledge particularly the work and leadership of Associate Professor Wendy Larkin from the Melbourne Law School. She's retired now, but she and I have worked very closely over the last 12 or 13 years. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'll just share some insights from recent research exploring what influences student wellbeing and, importantly, what students say themselves about what would make a difference. We heard, I think, some really great insights from our panel earlier, and I hope to share a broader range of student voices on that. But I want to start with the problem, and I know that media attention around higher education is negative and persistent, but I do want to start with this article that came out a few months ago from The Guardian that gets to loneliness and the promise of higher education, and that promise is not being met. The aim and promise of higher education to be transformative and enriching educational experience, yet for many students, and this is supported in numerous studies that colleagues and I have run, that many students are reporting experiencing isolation, a low sense of well-being and distress. And we know it started before COVID, perhaps accelerated during COVID, student disengagement, not just from our classes, but student disengagement from connection, student disengagement from university life. And this is just a couple of items from the Quilt 2023 Quilt survey data, which I think sort of capture that sort of isolation or lack of connection. That less than half of the students are reporting interacting with their other students for study purposes, either to give or receive help in their studies, and less than half are reporting a sense of belonging. And I was just mentioning to Lisa this morning that when you sort of drill down a bit further, what is a bit alarming or concerning to me is that first-year students or commencing students, a higher proportion of them, so over 49%, say they feel a sense of belonging, but by the time they get to the third year or later years, that drops. It's just over 42, so it drops 7 percentage points, meaning that what's happening in the university experience where they sort of leave with less of a sense of belonging than in the first year. And as Sarah mentioned, belonging is now quite well established to be closely associated with students' retention, but also mental health and wellbeing, mental health. This is just a graph from data from the Hilda household survey, longitudinal data, that shows, a rise, and I'm sure this will resonate with many of you. We know this, we've heard it a lot, not only in the media, but in universities and other research as well, of young people. This was from a couple of years ago. So many of these young people are currently in higher education or about to enter higher education. And there has been a growing awareness and I think focus among institutional leaders about addressing the problem of psychological distress and poor well-being among students. And one more media article, but it's from about 6 years ago, from the UK. This is not just an Australian problem, this is a global problem related to what they call is the surge in anxiety and stress across campuses. I can pick up media reports in the US, it's a similar kind of thing. But what I found quite interesting about this article is it's questioning the role of universities, questioning whether what students are experiencing in universities in terms of the structures, the systems, the environments, could that be contributing to poor mental well-being or contributing to psychological distress? And I think when we're talking about young people entering higher education and anxiety and their well-being, we have to think about it in the broader context. Scholars, very well-known scholars, and I've just got here Ron Barnett, who's a kind of a leading thinker. He's a philosopher, but also a higher education researcher. Describes, and he's not the only one, but describes students today as navigating an age of anxiety. And it's not just about their academic pressures, it's deep uncertainty about their identity, their futures, the state of the world more broadly. And this kind of climate of anxiety inevitably filters into the student experience, influencing how they engage with their studies, how they engage with each other, and how they engage with our institutions. Barnett says that not only is this anxiety that we cannot dissolve it, but we should not as educators. Meaning, the question for us to ask is, how might universities help students navigate this complex, challenging, uncertain world? Another way that I like to phrase it is, how can we, as educators and as institutions, become places that foster students' sense of purpose, that self-formation, connections, a sense of competence and meaning in an uncertain world? And those questions are at the heart of wellbeing. Those questions get to wellbeing. So I'm going to give you a definition, it's our kind of working definition, because sometimes when I speak to colleagues, some think of wellbeing as feeling good or happiness, and that is not the definition of wellbeing that I'm referring to. Not that we don't want students to be happy, we do, but that is not the primary concern. So we follow the definition of the World Health Organization that wellbeing is a state in which individuals realise their abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and able to make a contribution to his or their community. And really, if I look at mission statements of universities and graduate aptitudes, it's pretty similar. This is what universities say they want from their students. They want students, or we want our students, to realise their potential, to reach their potential, to be able to cope with setbacks, failures, challenges, challenging situations, to be able to study and work productively and then graduate and be active, contributing citizens. And that is the definition of wellbeing. So another thing that I just want to point out before I get to the research, although this next slide is about the research, is that it's important to recognise that students or people often experience co-occurring states of wellbeing at the same time as distress. So a lot of the kind of headline research is about 40% of students are experiencing depression or 30% of students are experiencing psychological distress, without recognising that it's much more nuanced than that. And I think it's helpful to think about what Corey Keyes has developed, which is kind of a dual continua. So this was the latest first year of a 3-year national study where we went to 11 institutions of different sizes. This data only reports on 8 because we had to exclude 3 due to poor response rates. And this year we've got more, so hopefully there'll be more to report at the end of next year. But here from our survey, about a fifth, 22% of students are what we would be called thriving. So they are experiencing high sense of purpose, high social connectedness, psychological resilience, they have positive emotions. These students also report high course satisfaction, high confidence that they're going to complete and do well, and really importantly, that a strong sense of course fit and value. They feel like they're at the right course, doing the right thing for them, and that it has value and meaning for them. And they also report good academic performance. On the other end, so there are 5 classifications, but on the other end is what I would call these are the seriously at-risk students. These students have report a high level of psychological distress, so symptoms of anxiety and depression, in combination with low wellbeing, what Keyes calls languishing. So they're stagnant. They feel like they're lacking growth. They don't have a sense of purpose. They lack motivation. These are the students who are going to be disengaged, but also at risk of mental health issues. These students report very low levels of course satisfaction, low confidence that they're going to complete their courses. Many regret the course choice. They're in courses, they're stuck in courses that they don't see meaning and value in, and they are struggling. And then these are the other 3 kind of classifications. So the largest proportion are those who are doing moderately well. They're not thriving, they're not flourishing, but they're doing well. And then you have 12.6% who we call high distress only, meaning that they have symptoms of psychological distress, but actually they also have high levels of well-being, meaning they feel a strong sense of purpose, they're in the right course for them, they feel like they're growing, they're learning, and what they're doing is valuable. These students tend to be in courses that are highly competitive. The job market is very, for example, performing arts, creative arts. So they don't question their course. They love their course. They have strong intrinsic interest and a connection and identity with their course, but they do also have high levels of anxiety and depression. So need support, but research has shown that high levels of psychological well-being is known to offset and buffer the impact of psychological distress. And this is what I mean by having to have a kind of more nuanced view, because the headline here might be, 38% of students at risk, high distress, and it is a little bit more nuanced than that. And then you have this 14.8% of students who are low wellbeing only, meaning while they don't have high levels of psychological distress, they are languishing, low motivation, low sense of purpose, low confidence they're going to complete, low sense of course fit. These are likely to be the students who disengage. Very unlikely to participate in any curricular or extracurricular activities. So this is the picture on the dual continuum of students in our first year of our study. And we've been investigating systematically over about 13 years how can student wellbeing be improved, with a focus on estimating the extent to which factors that can be changed in the student experience influences or predicts the mental health and wellbeing outcomes. So our aim initially within my own university was to improve the university's capacity to support student wellbeing by identifying factors in the educational environments that can prevent or protect against distress and enhance and boost psychological wellbeing at a population level. And that was really what we wanted to do, to have the widest reach. What is the evidence where there can be strategies or interventions that will have the widest reach of to students? We know that there are great programs that reach a small proportion of the population, and I would argue that most of the times they are the already engaged students. And so we wanted to see how can we shift the population, because the research suggests that when you shift the mean of the population towards flourishing, it's like the tide that lifts all boats, that it will have a positive effect on those who are experiencing some mental health difficulties. So which factors are most strongly associated? And the second is the qualitative. What do students, as those who are experiencing and those who are the experts in their experience, what do they suggest? So we've run multiple studies over the years, repeated studies, looking at, first of all, in our model, so using regression modelling, the background factors and situational stresses, and then the middle, the student experiences, looking at their experiences of teaching and learning, their perceptions of course value and fit, and university belonging and climate. And what we've found, and repeated studies consistently, is that the course and university experiences are the strongest predictors of students' mental health and wellbeing scores, even when factors such as financial strain. There's a lot in the literature about the association between financial strain and mental health difficulties, but our studies showed that even when financial strain, worry about future employment, English language difficulties, these are the situational stresses, and a range of demographic factors were taken into account. And what are the course experiences that explained quite a lot of the variance in the mental health and wellbeing scores? As you could probably predict, it's academic stress, and part of that is course workload. Students' sense of course value, is this valuable to me? Am I in the right course for me? Their academic self-efficacy, whether they feel like it might be challenging, but they're quite confident that they can do well. Teacher support, and in particular, teacher autonomy support, so teachers' support of students' autonomy. Peer engagement, that's interaction with students, sense of belonging, and university climate. Now, sense of belonging is very strongly associated with not only course satisfaction, but with mental health and wellbeing outcomes. But one thing that sort of puzzled me a little bit was what that means. So in the quilt data, as I was speaking to Lisa, it's a single item. Students might be answering something different. In our study, we did use a scale of multiple items, but even so, it wasn't, we asked about the social connection, disconnection, institutional affiliation, support. So we tried to have a sort of better understanding of belonging, but it still wasn't so clear. And as I said, what we wanted to do was provide some evidence that could inform universities' allocation of resources into what programs, what strategies are likely to have impact widely across the student population. So we wanted to sort of know a little bit more about this. So we did last year, I think for purely qualitative research, it's fairly large scale, 200 interviews with students from many institutions, really asking them about what belonging means for them, when they felt it, what are the examples of when they felt it. And these are the 7 themes sort of in order of frequency. And by far, I have to say, it was around connections. Many of these themes sort of align with what scholarly definitions of belonging are. Number 5 was interesting for us, but it's number 1, connections. And I think that's captured really well by this student quote. I'll just read it out. I feel like belonging means a connection to both what you're studying and also the people that you're studying with. So belonging, I think, can mean, do you feel connected? And what I really like about this quote is it captures what many qualitative researchers in this space have been saying for a while, which is there are 2 sides of that connection. There's academic connection and academic belonging. And I think that is at the core of student sense of belonging, much more so than institutional affiliation. So, and these 2 quotes kind of capture it from a first-year science student at a GO8 university. My priority is definitely to study, to learn. So I think how the subject is organised, I think that has a lot to do with my sense of belonging. You feel like what you're doing is meaningful. And I think this is consistent with what we heard from one of the student panellists about. They feel like what they're doing has meaning and that they're, contributing to something. And this sense of how this subject is organised, a consistent theme, not only in this research, but in the literature around in higher education, is clarity. Students seek clarity in their subject, and that helps with their belonging. And the second quote from a second-year nursing student from a regional university, so things which make you feel like, yes, I am at the right place, doing the right thing, and there are various support structures around me. So at the core of it is I'm doing the right thing for me, and I know that there are these other things that can support me. And then the other side of connection is the social. But really, interestingly, the majority, not all, but certainly more than half of the comments were really about social belonging within the academic context. So having enough friends at one or two each sort of class, I guess, so you feel like you're not just by yourself all the time, at least not wanting to be. And then this second quote, a sense of belonging, it's about sort of making connections with your peers, being able to talk to them in class and have a good time, but also to bring them out of class and spend your free time with them as well. And that's something I struggle with. So this sense that the initial connection hopefully happens, is structured, is facilitated in class, and then hopefully it will spill out. And as I said, when we're talking about how can we get the widest reach, to me, that direction of spill out into broader social connection is likely to reach more students than relying on the wonderful kinds of clubs and societies which are great, but thinking that that will, for the proportion of students who do engage with that will then filter back into the classroom. I don't think it goes in the other direction to the whole population. As I said before, one of the other questions that we were, other than the factors that are associated with wellbeing, was about improving student wellbeing and what do students suggest. And so, analysing, we didn't use AI, ethical AI, like Chris was saying. We tried this year, and it's probably my lack of being able to prompt with our secure university system. But I found that the AI was doing word recognition rather than interpreting within the context of what students were saying. So I haven't quite cracked the that AI piece, but we did manually, a team, analyse and code over the years. So it's not just last year, over 12,000 student comments. And these are the consistent main themes that come up. Now, in some institutions, the order will change. But very consistently, it's this kind of curriculum, teaching, practice and quality, and student services and support. And I'll just a bit more student voice to illustrate what types of sub-themes come out of the curriculum one. So teachers would stop teaching the subjects with the view that we all want to become doctors because we don't. Or at least I don't. Teach things as if they are important worldly bits of knowledge, which I believe they are. This is getting to meaning and value for them. Now, there are other quotes, there are many quotes like this, but there are other quotes that say the opposite. Give me a connection to my future work, more direct connection. But you can see that for some students, the strong focus on university for jobs is for them not helpful to their well-being. The prompt was, we asked them, what is the single most important thing that the university can do to improve your well-being? Because in previous years we asked them for suggestions and sometimes they wrote essays. And the second one, please find a way to make assessment seem more meaningful and useful. I feel with a lot of them I'm just ticking a box and no one actually cares. So both of these are getting to meaning and that academic connection or that academic belonging. And then the other two, I think, again, hundreds like this, I'm just picking two out that I think illustrate the point. Them asking for more interaction, more classes on campus, but more in-person. Face-to-face might also mean online. Some of these regional universities were wholly online. So I think they mean synchronous when they say face-to-face and encourage more participation. So what they're saying, and this is coming under curriculum and teaching, what they're saying is this is what they're looking for from their educators. So I know I'm running out of time, so last two slides I'll run through fairly quickly. So the question that I sometimes pose to my colleagues is, what would the student experience look like if well-being were a core design principle and not an afterthought, not a bolt-on? And well-being, as I defined before, well-being in terms of sense of purpose, sense of growth, contribution, what would the student experience look like? And it's fairly, I think now, a good, not only theoretical, but evidence-based to support learning experience designed with these principles. Academic and social belonging, positive relationships, teachers, peers with the institution, regular experiences of students feeling competence, right? It's challenging, but I think I can do it, and that critical role of feedback there. Regular experiences of students exercising autonomy or agency, and these all feed what is considered to be fundamental to wellbeing, and that's autonomous motivation, which means that students are doing something that they're interested in or that align with their values and their goals. So how could we design curriculum and the experience to afford students with regular experiences of these principles or concepts? And of course, when we're talking about a big problem like mental health and wellbeing, it's the curriculum is only one aspect. I'm just focusing on curriculum because, as I said, one of the things we're looking at is wide reach across the student population. But I do recognise that there are other parts of a whole of university approach to boosting, enhancing student wellbeing, as well as institutional enablers. And I have to say, when we kind of did a desktop audit, I think universities have put in a lot of resources and energy and commitment to services, to supportive environments, to raising awareness, to destigmatising mental health. But I think the critical part in terms of reaching all students is that engaging curricula. So just very quickly to sum up, student wellbeing is shaped, among other things, by meaningful academic experiences. Primarily, I would argue, meaningful academic experience where they feel like it's aligned with their values, whether that's utility value or intrinsic value. It's appropriately challenging and it's autonomy supportive. That it's shaped by supportive relationships and a sense of belonging. And these are the things that I think, some of the things that universities can do to support it. First of all, to empower educators. It's not a quick fix. It's not one simple thing. It does require intentional curriculum review and design and these other things. But I'll leave you there with if you're interested, website to the research and translation of that research into practical strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chi, for that wonderful presentation. Got us thinking about what we should be putting into our courses, that's for sure. So we'll just hold off on the questions for the moment because we'll group them up for both keynote speakers, if that's all right with everyone. And don't forget to access your Slido by asking, some questions of both speakers. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our second keynote speaker for today and to welcome Sarah Bendel, who is the first Assistant Ombudsman at the National Student Ombudsman. Sarah Bendel loved her time at university. So did I, Sarah. I loved it and wants to ensure that all students can experience that amazingly transformative potential of higher education for themselves and for their community. She's a lawyer by trade, but alongside practicing as a lawyer, she's always worked in roles involving dispute resolution. Sarah has led dispute resolution teams, large and small, in areas ranging from sexual harassment, discrimination, consumer law, telecommunications, domestic building, child protection, public housing, and health services. Wow, that's a wide range, Sarah. Over the last 25 years, she has seen firsthand how powerful it can be for people to participate in processes to resolve their conflict. Sarah thinks we sometimes don't realise the impact that unresolved conflict can have on our health and wellbeing. The National Student Ombudsman is a dispute resolution service set up specifically for students and Australian higher education providers. The NSO is committed to facilitating trauma-informed dispute resolution services and amplifying students' voices to encourage continual improvement in the student experience across the higher education sector. Dispute resolution is a powerful way to change systems and processes for the better. When one person has the courage to speak out, it can result in improvements that prevent others from experiencing the same issue. Through the NSO, Sarah hopes to see tangible improvements in student experience for all students across the Australian higher education sector. We look forward to your presentation, Sarah, on wellbeing for all, insights from student complaints first. Welcome, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah, to the stage.
Hello, everyone, and hello online as well. Thank you very much, Uni New South Wales, for the opportunity to join the conversation about something so important as student wellbeing and belonging at what is my first New South Wales Higher Education Sector Summit. I also want to, while I have the microphone, express a heartfelt thank you to all of you for the very warm welcome I've been given into the sector over the last 6 months. I've worked in dispute resolution, as Patsy said, for a long time now. I've got a couple of decades here, but Patsy's right, it's actually a couple of decades and a half. I've worked in many sectors, as Patsy said. I won't go through all of those again. So this is my first, you would have heard from Patsy's summary, my first experience of the higher education sector since I was a student myself. And since starting in this role and visiting campuses across the country, I found myself thinking about my time as a student, both as an undergraduate and a postgraduate. And in the context of preparing for the presentation, I've been thinking about the many different experiences I have had that shaped my wellbeing and sense of belonging at the time. And so I thought I would share one with you today. It's the story of a lecturer who took the time to help me. And I did love my university experience, but like all students, it was difficult at times. So this is a story about when it was a little bit difficult for me. I studied arts and law for my undergraduate. My own experience of being an undergraduate is probably similar to most students today, but I think at the time I was probably in the minority. I had to live out of home because my family basically moved out on me. They moved 300 kilometres away when I started my uni degree. And to fund my life, I had to hold down 4 casual jobs while studying full-time. 5 jobs if you count walking a red kelpie called Chester a couple of times a week. I didn't have any spare time, and all my money went on rent, bills and food when I could afford it. I missed lectures due to having to work and often had to work back at uni late trying to catch up, which would mean braving the late night walk from the library to the car, feeling like I was taking my life into my hands every time I did it. Keys in hand for a makeshift weapon. By 3rd year, I was exhausted and at breaking point. My education experience had become transactional. I wasn't enjoying it. I was constantly behind. Assignments were a stressful nuisance rather than a learning opportunity. And I thought I still wanted to be a lawyer, but I wasn't really sure. I missed my family and I was completely lost. So at that time, it was the support of one lecturer that I recall the most. Joycey, which is her real name, was a lecturer with a reputation for being as tough as nails. Joycey, the one all the students were scared of, including myself, had noticed that I'd skipped a few lectures, I was no longer expressing any views in class, and was most likely looking like crap from what I can recall of myself at that time. She asked me to wait after a lecture and took me for a coffee. Her shout. I want to stop and tell you at this point that I was not an amazingly gifted student. So if you're thinking that this is a story of a lecturer who is helping her star student, that is definitely not it. So Joycey asked me what was wrong. I told her everything. Not only did she listen, but she advised. She told me to get out there and get a proper job. She said go part-time and that I had enough experience to get a much better paying job. She told me to do something legal related and start experiencing the more professional working world. It was the best advice, and in truth, it's shaped my life since. I took Joyce's advice. I signed up to a temporary employment consultancy and was quickly offered a job, a casual employee job, at the telecommunications industry ombudsman. I dropped down to 2 subjects a semester. It was life-saving advice. It revived my love of learning. I met different people. I loved being able to experience office work. And the amazing truth of it is, if Joycey hadn't taken the time and effort to ask if I needed help, and if she hadn't offered genuine advice, I possibly would not have finished my degree and most likely would not have this job today. And I probably wouldn't have met my husband because I met him at that job too, but that is a different story. Joycey inspired me to reimagine my life at that point. She gave me support and the courage to have a go at something different. And she convinced me not to give up on my university studies. She also contributed to a much healthier and stable lifestyle through just one higher paying job. And Chester. I did keep walking Chester. I loved that jog. For me, the story of Joycey demonstrates a critical ingredient for fostering wellbeing and belonging in students. Taking the time to care and notice a student and going that extra mile. I'm sure there are many academics and university staff out there who are doing this. I just want to see more of it for individual students and at a policy and systems level. Got to remember to change slides. I think this story probably tells you why I'm here today and why I'm in this role. I'm here because I believe that all 1.6 million higher education students in Australia deserve a high quality and safe student experience. And I think that some students are getting that right now and some aren't. To reach Australia's goal of 80% of workforce having VET or uni qualifications by 2050, and to fill the skills shortages we have in critical sectors, we know we need to do more, not just to attract more students into the sector, but to support them to succeed throughout the university experience. This is why wellbeing and equity are priorities within the university's accord. The National Student Ombudsman now plays a role in this space through amplifying the voice of student complainants to highlight the things that we can do better as a system and within the system. As any good ombudsman will tell you, complaints are free feedback. So this afternoon, I'm going to tell you about the national picture of student experience that's starting to emerge from the NSO's first 5 months of service. I'm hoping to start a conversation about how we can use this information to improve wellbeing and belonging for our students and for future students. Most of you will know about the NSO already, and Patsy did a pretty good job of giving you a summary, so I'm going to keep it pretty brief. The NSO is a new service providing free and fair ways to resolve student complaints about universities. We work with students and providers to resolve individual complaints and to identify improvements to university policies, procedures, and cultures that will raise the quality and safety of the student experience. We've got 60 staff and a number of different complaints handling tools, from early dispute resolution through to investigation, motion inquiries, conciliation, and restorative engagement. We opened our doors on the 1st of February, and we received our first complaint within 15 minutes, and that was on a Saturday morning. It takes a lot to complain, even more to keep complaining through an escalated complaint service like the NSO. So we know that the things students are raising with us really matter to them. So what are we hearing? Well, on the numbers, in the first 5 months we've been open, we've heard from 1,750 students about what's going wrong with their student experience. and we've classified about 1,500 of them as complaints. In case you're wondering what the difference is, some of them are outside of our jurisdiction, and most of those are from vet students, and the other roughly 100 are students that just want to talk to us. They don't actually want to lodge a complaint. We know that 1,750 isn't a lot when compared to 1.6 million students across the country. But we also know that not all students feel comfortable or have the time to complain. So we know that one complaint can often represent the views of many. So who is complaining? 70% of the students coming to the NSO are current students. 40% of the students coming to the NSO are international students, which I don't think we have up there, but it's good for you to know. And that, that's disproportionate to the number of international students we have in Australia. And just over 60% are at undergraduate level. A national picture of the issues frustrating students is beginning to emerge. I wasn't going to put this slide up before I introduced it, but it's there now because I can see that you're all reading it, and it is an important slide. I will take you through the 3 most common complaint categories in a minute, but I wanted to put this slide in here because across all of the complaints that we've received, I can see strong themes of wellbeing and belonging. And overall, I think the summary on this slide captures the themes that are embedded through most of those complaints. So what students are saying is that the university isn't listening to them, doesn't understand their needs, doesn't care about them, is too focused on money, is out of date or out of touch, does not understand the challenges students face, that the university's bureaucracy is costing them money and prolonging their courses, and that the university and its systems are unfair. And again, I know this is negative, but there's a lot of positive, but with the NSO, we're dealing with complaints, and that is the focus of this presentation. So the most common category of complaint is what we call course administration. These are mostly back-of-house issues that let students down, seemingly small customer service issues that can have a big impact on students' lives. So many students in this category have shared their frustrations about essentially poor customer service, delays, poor communication, misinformation, or no information about things like course design, course availability, course transfers, withdrawals, or unfair processes around recognition of prior learning or special consideration. Delays in administering these things can push a student's course completion back, which in turn delays their finish date and them getting into the workforce. So course administration represents 33% of student complaints to the NSO. If we factor in fees and refunds, that figure jumps up to 45% of matters through the door. Many of these shouldn't come to the NSO, and while others present really easy opportunities for universities to create systems improvements. This quote comes from a student who complained to us about misinformation and subsequent poor support from the university regarding a $16,000 debt for her course. This student returned to study after 10 years in the workforce. She was unsure how fee help worked. She applied for it in her first year, but she didn't know she had to reapply for it every year. So by the start of third year, she had incurred a debt of $16,000. The university only communicated to her about the debt via her email, her uni email. She said she did receive the letters by email, which she assumed was part of the fee help process. So while she was constantly engaging with the uni in person or on phone about all sorts of matters through second year, at no time did anyone at the university actually mention the debt. She found out about the debt when she sought reimbursement from the university for other expenses associated with her degree. And that was when she was told that she was barred from returning in third year and that the fees couldn't be transferred to HECS. Despite explaining to the provider that she could not afford $16,000, no payment plan was offered. Even after the NSO has become involved, this university has still failed to engage meaningfully to support this student with a payment plan and a way back to her studies. In the student's words, "The financial burden has severely impacted my mental health and shaken my trust in the education system, which seems to prioritise financial gain over student success." The stress of having this debt and being unable to progress her studies has been ongoing for over a year. In her mind, her professional life is on hold, and she is heavily in debt for what she believes to be inherently unfair circumstances, with an institution who has provided procedural blockers to genuine resolution. This is clearly not the way to foster wellbeing and belonging. And given the systems and processes involved in this complaint, I suspect this isn't a one-off situation. Equal second most common complaint type is the category of teaching and learning, which represents 18% of complaints received at the NSO. There is a lot in this category, issues ranging from the level of academic supports for students, poor quality teaching, out-of-date resources, issues obtaining supervisors for postgraduates, or issues with relationships between supervisors and students. But the majority of matters in this category are about the processes relating to assessment, not the "I should have got an HD", but the "I am now in a serious academic situation due to an unfair assessment process." So many stories of students feeling like their university hasn't listened to their life circumstances, or that it has applied the rules inconsistently or unfairly, or that there have been significant delays in a decision. Here is just one story. I missed an exam due to medical reasons. I went through the proper process to get this resolved and it was approved. However, the subject coordinator never rescheduled the exam, so I received a 0. When I followed this up, the subject coordinator dragged the conversation out through emails and never got around to scheduling an exam for me. I had to apply for conditional enrolment to stay in the course. My conditional enrolment was approved, but then I didn't meet the requirements for the conditional enrolments in the next semester, so I have been suspended from the course. If the subject coordinator had been able to organise the catch-up exam for me, I wouldn't be in this position today. Similarly, in this category of complaints is placements, and this seems to be a major pain point for students across the sector. The majority of students complaining about placements relate to social work, nursing and teaching. To shed some light on the types of matters arising, the below comments come from a student whose placement was cancelled at short notice in semester 1 through no fault of their own, and who then needed to undertake placements for semesters 1 and 2 at the same time, despite having to work to support their studies. In this student's words, "Some students now feel blamed for a situation entirely out of their control. The lack of timely and honest communication has undermined our trust in the system and left us feeling unsupported during a critical part of our education. Having to complete an 8-week placement for semester 1 and 2 all at once is way too much for students in their first year." Or this student's experience. "I was expected to perform tasks beyond my training, including working alone in high-risk environments. My primary supervisor was absent for the duration of my placement. My secondary supervisor had poor communication skills and did not address problems in the supervisory relationship in a fair and educational manner. I had limited peer interaction, no group supervision, and no environment to develop my competencies. These all made my placement experience isolating, distressing, and counterproductive to my development and learning. Despite repeatedly raising concerns with my unit coordinator and the head of department, the uni did not intervene or provide an alternative placement. Instead, I was left to struggle in an unfair and dysfunctional situation which severely impacted my mental health, studies, and potentially my future career. Feeling like I had no other option, I terminated the placement for the sake of my well-being and mental health. As a result, I unfairly received a fail grade rather than a withdrawn or incomplete. The department then withdrew and re-enrolled me in the unit without my consent and charged me twice. This has delayed my graduation by at least 7 months and left me without any clear placement plan." Can you imagine the frustration of this and the impact that this would have on your sense of belonging to the university? The final category relates to suspension or exclusion processes from the provider due to academic performance or misconduct. Actually, academic performance issues is the most common complaint type overall at the NSO, at 9% of all complaints. Pretty much every complaint we receive involves a student with challenging life circumstances. For me, these complaints are often heartbreaking. They are about students who feel humiliated, ashamed, disappointed, lost, scared, angry, and let down by their institution. I find the complaints from international students the hardest to read. As a way to improve student wellbeing and belonging, I would encourage all universities to review the student cases that go through the academic suspension and exclusion processes and consider them as a failure not of the student, but of the institution. It seems to me that these processes are applied individually to each student, and the focus of the process is the student to defend or advocate for their academic future. From what I can see from the complaints to the NSO, not only is the pressure and the stress of this process crushing for the student, but it usually occurs in the context of whatever else is happening in the student's life that has caused their academic performance to suffer. So often the student is already suffering trauma, grief, is mentally or physically unwell. But if the university was to zero in on its use of academic performance processes and examine these student experiences from a university systems perspective, I'm sure there would be significant learnings that go to the heart of creating a student-centred service and one that supports better wellbeing and belonging. For example, the identification of red flags or risk factors for these students that ought to have been identified much earlier and hence prevented the student from being in a situation in the first place. Or improvements to the processes themselves that are considered by students to be intimidating, heavy-handed and unfair. Or if a student does need to be excluded, how can this be done in a way that is as supportive as possible, including them exiting with something to show for the subjects already completed? These sorts of matters have a significant impact on a student's relationship to the university. It is difficult to feel a sense of belonging to an institution that you think has or has almost unfairly excluded you. As this student says, I'm pretty sure you've read that one already, so I'm going to skip over in the interest of time and read you one more. I am 19 years old and I want to be able to continue my studies and make a future for myself. The uni's process of administering unsatisfactory academic progress, first stage at risk, final stage at risk, show cause, exclusion, places the onus entirely on the student to take initiative in seeking support for taking necessary action. However, for students like myself who are somewhat naturally hesitant to ask for help due to introversion or fear of embarrassment, this system does not work well. So to conclude, I know we are all here because we care and feel passionately about the higher education sector. We're here because we recognise that what lies at the heart of the education sector is our higher education students. On behalf of the 1,750 students who have come forward to the NSO so far, my message to you today is that while many students are happy with their student experience, for some students, and often the most vulnerable, we need to do better. If we pay attention to the students who are struggling, take the time to understand and learn from the challenges they have faced, we will build universities for the future that can genuinely cater for students from all walks of life with different needs. There is no reason in 2025 that higher education should not be for anyone that wants to participate. Building trust in the sector begins with respect for students, knowing students, appreciating them and listening to their needs. The most common phrase we hear from students at the NSO across complaints is that they don't feel heard. When students feel heard and supported, they are more likely to succeed. The experiences of students who complain to universities and to escalation entities like the NSO, and the experiences of students who exercise their right of appeal through university processes are a valuable source of data on how universities can improve. So in my view, what is needed to improve student wellbeing and belonging is a fairer system which we can only achieve through humans in this system caring and committed to making the effort to change it wherever improvements are identified. We need to care about the individual students within the system, and this requires us to listen to their experiences, to demonstrate that we have heard them, and to collaborate with students for change. We are all players in this complex system, and it's easy to blame the system, certain laws, policies, procedures, and ways of working. But my request to you today is to fight back against that attitude, because everyone has the power to make a difference within and to the system. And sometimes you don't need a systems change. You just need to be more attuned to students, like Joycey was for me. Thank you.
Okay, folks, so we'll get our speakers back up on stage and we'll ask a few questions, if that's okay. All right. Okay. Oh, no, just standing because the microphone's there. Yeah, and I'll just come over here. So we have a couple of questions that have come through. A couple from Jack for Chi. If you were to design a university from the ground up to optimise for student belonging, what would be the single biggest change from the way our unis work now? Chi.
Thanks, Jack, for that really simple and easy question about this building. I think one thing I forgot to mention is a lot of our research is focused on the undergraduate, young people in higher education. So I think that if it was designing from ground up, what comes to the top of my mind now, and I'll probably think of something else on the plane later, is really getting that first year right. And I don't mean just orientation. I think a lot of institutions get the orientation, that's fine. But getting their experience and that engagement, helping students to discover their strengths, what they're really interested in, what their values are, through the kind of exploration, risk-free exploration in the first 6 months. Something that I've proposed at our university that has not gone down well in some corners, it's gone down okay in others, is removing grades in the first year to undo habits from year 12, undo the focus, because Melbourne, as is UNSW, we do get high achieving students who are grades obsessed. It does create, we know from our studies with students, it creates a competitive, not collaborative environment. It leads to poorer group projects where the obsession is on marks rather than on the process and the experience. But a genuine pass, not a 50%, but standards and formative feedback along the way. But how can we undo some of that habit that they've come in with and really try to tap into their intrinsic motivation to study? That's my...
Sounds like a plan. Okay. Chi, another follow-up question from Jack. So do universities need to invest more in teaching and learning, even if it means spending less in research? That's a very controversial question.
It is, and I would never... I don't think it's about... obviously, it's a really complex question. I don't think it's necessarily about more or less or taking away from research to give to teaching. I don't think that... the more we can give to teaching, the better. But I don't think it's just about the dollar value, but how it's spent. We're research-led, research-informed universities, but sometimes I think the resource allocation is not research-informed and not evidence-based. So it's not so much about how much. Of course, more is always better, but how is it spent? Where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? What does the evidence point to? That would be what I would say to that.
Okay, I've got another one from Kristen, actually. Is there a discipline effect in the data related to student wellbeing?
Yeah, great question. You would think so, but no, not across faculties, nor across institution size in our first year. And I said it's only 8, but we'd had a range, large and then small regional, in very small regional, and there wasn't a significant difference across disciplines or institutions. And I think because fundamentally the core principles or concepts that nurture wellbeing are sort of transcend disciplines. They're about human growth and self-actualisation. So,
great, thanks for that. One for Sarah. So TEXA has mentioned excess scrutiny on certain institutions given recent challenges in cohesion. Do you work with TEXA and other regulators in any capacity?
Yes.
Okay, resounding yes.
Yes, we work with everyone. We're new into the sector, so we're keen to meet and work with all facets of the sector so that we can understand it and to add value where we can. So definitely TEXA is a stakeholder for us. And in some ways, you probably know better than me, the NSO was partly created because TEXA doesn't have an individual dispute resolution function. So we're here to fill that gap. We're conscious of the threshold standards, and we will build in processes to identify potential breaches of the threshold standards and refer them to TEXA, which is what any ombudsman scheme does with the partner regulator. But we'll never do something like that without a higher education provider knowing that we're doing that. And in fact, in the 1,500 complaints we're dealing with, most of them, overwhelming majority, are being resolved through early dispute resolution because that's our goal. We know that the best way to maintain that relationship between a provider and a student is for quick resolution. So that's our focus.
Great. So a question in terms of what practices do you suggest universities put in place for a fairer system in respect of academic appeals?
Look, I think that's a really hard one for me to answer with any kind of evidence base because I'm not you guys, and I can see a little bit of how those processes work. And I raised this today in this talk because really when I look at all of the complaints, the students that are suffering the most are in that category. So I think that, I mentioned some of them in my presentation before. I think that if universities looked at the processes themselves and tried to make them easier for a student to participate in, then that would be a pretty great start and wouldn't take that much effort. I've spoken before about a student who was excluded from a university and their access to emails and everything, this was an international student, was cut off straight away. So they didn't have, and this student was in a, you can imagine suffering from mental health issues and all sorts of things, but they were worried about being homeless and they found themselves excluded and straight away no access to anything from the university. So it's little things like that I think that if you reviewed your processes, from a student perspective, you would pick up and you could change. But I do really think there's so much potential in that idea of risk factors, earlier risk factors, so that students don't find themselves in those situations in the first place. And I know that there's some great work going on in that space. I've heard from some providers that are really working on much more nuanced and effective AI solutions to risk factors for students. And I think there's huge potential there if it's done ethically, as we heard before. So there's lots of things. There's so much that you could do, which is why my key message is that everyone should have a go at making the change.
Thank you, Sarah. So one for Chi. And this theme came through the last session in the Quilt series of talks, but it's the aspect of what, if any, is the relationship between class size and student wellbeing from your particular research? Did you address that aspect?
No, we didn't look at class size. We did look at, I suppose, cohort size because we looked at programs, degree programs, and there was no difference that we observed across disciplines or programs in terms of mental health and wellbeing outcomes. There's slight differences, as I said, in the programs that have a very competitive or narrowed kind of job market that we did see sort of elevate a higher proportions of students with reporting symptoms of psychological distress. But as I said, that was countered or buffered by the fact that they also had high levels of the positive wellbeing. Mm-hmm. And so they were felt like they were in the right course, they had strong motivation and they were engaged, but then they were also kind of anxious and really stressed about the future and other things as well. So I wouldn't say that there's large or significant differences across program size.
I suspect the COVID effect would have had a bit of impact on their future, anxiety for the future as well. This is the feeling I got from several students, including my own kids at home, like what's our future going to be like post-pandemic? Anyway. So Sarah, another question for you. What is the source of the government's notion that 80% of the workforce will need a university or VET qualification by 2050? What is the current percentage?
I feel like that is not a question for me. I'm sorry, whoever has asked that one.
We can move on if you want.
I'm not qualified to answer that question. Sarah's telling me it's 50% now, so that's good to know. There's a long way to go. But the NSO is independent of government. We don't make policy. We're here purely to resolve disputes and to amplify the voices of students, to identify things that are going wrong that we could work on a systems level to prevent them in the future. But my own personal view is that I think it's great to have a goal of more people coming into the higher education sector, whether it's university or VET. It's life transforming. I mean, we all know that because we've all done that and it's shaped our lives. So if we care about people reaching their full potential, that's what we should aim for. Of course, there's going to be people that aren't interested, but it's an amazing experience. So from my perspective, I want as many people to be able to access it as possible.
Thank you. Also, just keeping you there, do you have any data around belonging or complaints stats related to delivery mode, e.g. online versus face-to-face, and in online asynchronous versus synchronous?
We don't have specific data on that, but I think in one of my slides I had the 45% of complaints are from students on campus. There's the least number of complaints, I think it's 11% from hybrid students learning hybrid. But equally, I don't know what we can discern from that data. I feel like there might be less complaints from people online or hybrid because maybe they don't have the time to complain. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it means, but we're only at 5 months as well. So if through the progression of the NSO, we learn something useful through the data that helps you understand how to improve on campus or how to improve hybrid modes, then we'll definitely let you know.
Okay, I think this is the final question, and it is again for Sarah. Given that overworking or working may have a bad impact on students' wellbeing, what help do you recommend for students who rely on work to study?
Who rely on working?
To study, yeah. So
yes, well...
from your lived experience,
I could talk all
I guess.
day about that one. So what advice for students that have to do that?
Yep.
Well, I told you my story earlier. I went part-time because I couldn't cope with a full-time load with the jobs that I had. I was working in the university cafe for lunch sometimes. I was working at a nightclub in the cloakroom. That's lots of stories for another day there. I was working in bars, I was working in cafes, I was walking Chester, and it was too hard. So I think the advice I would have for students in that situation is to just be kind to yourself and accept that it's not a failure to not be able to do everything, and sometimes it doesn't matter if it takes an extra couple of years. But I think the key lesson for me as I reflected on that story is that I actually didn't get there myself. I may not have got there to that realisation myself. It genuinely was this amazing lecturer that said, why are you doing all of these small-scale jobs? You're in third year now. You can actually transform your life in a way that's better for you. So I think it's... I think we all have the power to observe and improve a student's life, and for students, I think just go easy on yourself. A couple of years extra doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that insight, Sarah. Chi. I also agree that our students, they often want to contact us but feel a little bit weirdly intimidated, but we're always here. We've got our own lived experiences and ways of doing that we can help with. So everyone, could you put your hands together and thank our keynote speakers? Wonderful presentations. Okay, thank you. Now, the fun bit. We have a series of tables around the room, and they go back to these 6 themes that you would have selected when you registered. And in case you have forgotten, your little name tag has the theme that you selected at the time. Okay, so in the networking session that we're about to have, please grab a drink, something to eat, head for a table. There's plenty of wonderful staff here today from the Scientia Education Academy, Nexus Fellows, education-focused staff, subject matter experts, professional staff, third space folks that are here as part of the community to guide you through. So with that, we have about, 35 minutes. We'll be back at 4 o'clock. Please, socialise and network. So colleagues, if you could make your way back to your seats, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. I hope that networking session was valuable and informative and fun too. So I now hand over to our DBC ESE, Professor Sarah Madison, to introduce and kick off our panel discussion. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed lots of snacks and drinks. And I think Julie Hume is going to beam in online any moment now. In a moment, I'm going to...
Yeah, is she there?
Oh, hi, great, welcome. So let me first introduce our panel members, and above our heads here you can see Professor Julie Hume, who is a Professor of Psychology Education at the School of Social Science at Nottingham Trent University. Her scholarship draws on psychological theory and research methods to enhance higher education to create transformative opportunities for students and staff. Committed to enhancing inclusion in universities, Julie's impactful work has focused on the empowerment of disabled students, the promotion of student wellbeing and good mental health, and influencing policy and practice to better support education-focused academic staff across the sector. Julie is a member of the governance group of the Student Space, a web resource designed to ensure that no student is held back by poor mental health, run by the UK charity Student Minds. Julie's love of teaching and her commitment to creating inclusive education and development opportunities for students and staff has led to recognition through a 2016 National Teaching Fellowship, a Principal Fellowship of the HEA in 2013, and Chartered Psychologist status with the British Psychological Society, and she's currently the Deputy Chair of the UK Association of National Teaching Fellows. And Julie is meeting us at 7 a.m. So thank you very much, Julie. People here have got glasses of wine and champagne, but I hope you've got a coffee there with you. So thanks for joining us. Down the end here, we've got Professor Sarah O'Shea, who's the Dean of Graduate Research at Charles Sturt University. And Sarah is a nationally awarded educator and a globally respected authority on higher education equity. Currently serving as a distinguished professor and dean at Charles Sturt University, Sarah brings over 3 decades of leadership in advancing equity, access and student success across the sector. She also leads the Higher Education Equity Research Unit at Charles Sturt University, with research on inclusive teaching practices, student belonging and the experiences of first-in-family learners from rural backgrounds. With a career defined by high-impact research and strategic vision, Sarah has led national initiatives focused on supporting underrepresented students through transition and achievement in tertiary education. She's been awarded over $3 million of competitive research funding and manages $10 million in federal grants, delivering scalable evidence-based programs that reshape policy and practice. Sarah's commitment to systemic change to influence a future education bridges research, leadership and practice to ensure opportunity for all. She's a member of the ARC College of Experts, which I can tell you is a really freaking hard job to do, and has been recognised as a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, the Australian Learning and Teaching Fellow and a Churchill Fellow. So welcome, Sarah. Next, feel free to have a round of applause at any stage that you need to. Next we have Professor Gary Velan, who is the Senior Vice Dean Education in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at UNSW and was formerly the co-director of the UNSW Scientia Education Academy. A nationally award-winning medical educator, Gary's pioneered online formative assessment at UNSW and partnered with students to establish the Student Wellbeing Action Groups, or SWAGs, which we will hear more about this afternoon. And his research focuses on educational innovations including web-based assessment, virtual microscopy adaptive tutorials, concept and knowledge maps and their impact on learning outcomes in medical education. So thanks for joining us, Gary. We also have, next up is Dr. Belle Lim, who's the Associate Director of Mind Tribes and founder of Future Forte. Belle's a diversity and inclusion consultant, advocate and speaker. And as the Associate Director of Mind Tribes, which is an EDI consulting firm specialising in intersectionality of race, gender and culture, primarily in higher education and health sectors. Belle's a member of the Victorian Gender Equality Strategy Our Equal State Reference Group and the Welcoming Universities Advisory Group, the Scanlon Foundation Grants Committee and the Museum Victoria Inclusion Working Group. In 2018, Belle founded Future Forte, a not-for-profit charity for international students to thrive and advance diverse leadership, which she now serves on as the board chair. Future Forte has welcomed more than 3,000 women from around the globe, promoting diverse women in youth leadership, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. And Belle served as the national president of the Council of International Students in Australia over 2020 and 2021, representing 550,000 international students during those really difficult pandemic years. And prior to that, served 2 years as the National Women's Officer. Belle obtained her PhD in 2022 from Monash University and the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre on the topic of breast cancer genetics. She was a 2023 Fellow of the Schmidt Futures International Strategy Forum, representing Asia-Pacific region, and she's been recognised as a 2024 Global Citizen Youth Leader, a 2024 IEAA Tony Adams Rising Star Award, a 2023 Asia Society's Asia Game Changer finalist, and a 2019 Victorian International Student of the Year. And in 2024, Belle was inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll for Women. And she's not 110 years old, as you can see, so she's already achieved that at a fantastic young age. So great to have you with us, Belle. And next to me here, I have Aidan Tharamaja, who is a current UNSW student, fifth-year medical student here, serving as the Prince of Wales fifth-year representative. And Aidan was the UNSW Medical Society's Vice President Inclusivity and co-chair of the Student Wellbeing Action Groups, or SWAGs, in 2024. As the Vice President, he advocated for a range of equity, diversity and inclusivity portfolios and led initiatives including the Hospital Buddy System, the Refugee Health Initiative and Diversity in Medicine Month. As SWAG co-chair, he coordinated groups aimed at enhancing wellbeing, building communities, enabling successful transition between years and supporting students with mental health challenges. Aidan is passionate about enhancing the student experience and fostering a welcoming university environment. So a round of applause for all of our amazing panel members. Thank you. And so we've got a couple of big themes. It's been a fantastic day so far, and we've heard a range of things from, national statistics from the Quilt survey about the student experience, and sprinkled in there about sort of belonging and well-being. And we've also just our last speaker hearing from Sarah from the National Student Ombuds, that really specific incidences that occur with individual students. So one of the things that we'll sort of start on is that connection between belonging and well-being. And there's a really obvious connection which we've heard about before, and it's backed up by loads of research that if students are feeling socially connected, and that might be socially across student life or indeed within their discipline, they're more likely to show up, they feel part of a tribe, they feel better about themselves, and this leads to persistence and better results. And we did hear though from Chi that there's also that, you don't just show up in that one way. And her diagram of psychological well-being versus psychological distress, you can see that there can also, these things can be out of sync as well. So you might feel that you belong, but you have low well-being, or you might have great well-being, but you still don't feel like you belong. Sarah, if I start with you, you've done quite a bit of research on student belonging and wellbeing, emphasising the need to understand diverse student experiences. So what's your take on that connection? And when we had our pre-panel discussion, you wanted a provocation, and we love a good provocation. So that was, do students necessarily want to belong? We seem to ask them a lot, do you belong? Do you belong? Can we help you belong? So over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. So, the connections between belonging and well-being are, I think, they have a very clear alignment, but I suppose the sociologist in me wants to question, how we're defining belonging, because sometimes the way we define belonging may unintentionally reflect sort of dominant values or particular worldviews. So the small study, it certainly wasn't as big as Chi's study, the small study that we did was really asking students how it was that they created belonging. And surprisingly, some of them indicated that they felt pressure to belong, and often it was in ways that they didn't feel that the belonging, it was the way that they wanted to enact it. And also what we found was that belonging wasn't a static state, so it often evolved over time. And it reminds me a little bit about how we used to think about student transition. So I've been in the game, the higher education game, for long enough to remember many decades ago that we looked at transition as the initial 6 weeks of the semester. We thought, yeah, we get those first 6 weeks right, we're going to keep these students. But of course, what we realize now is that transition is a very lengthy, longitudinal process, that students have different transitions at different points in their undergraduate and postgraduate careers. And so I think we need to be very careful about thinking about belonging in a similar way, that it evolves over time, that it means very different things to different people, and also to be very careful that we're not asking students to fit in to what we conceive as belonging, and instead look at it as a way of how might we co-construct belonging with our students so that it better reflects their needs and their desires.
Fantastic, thank you. And Aidan, as a student on our panel here, what's your take on this? Do all students want to belong, and how do they want to belong, and does that change over time?
That's a very good question. I think there is quite a spectrum in terms of what students desire when it comes to belonging and what their interpretation is with regards to belonging. So I know for myself, I came into university after taking a gap year. Not many people from my high school were going into the degree that I'd chosen. And so I didn't really know anyone coming into university. And having a range of opportunities available to me, whether it be academic opportunities to get involved in special interest groups, extracurricular activities, that allowed me to form connections with other people, to find niche communities or even larger communities that I felt I could belong to, and then form lasting friendships, even lifelong friendships that have still maintained to this day now that I'm in fifth year. But at the same time, I've also spoken to some of my colleagues who find that for them, university is mainly about obtaining their degree, it's about their career advancement, and for them, getting involved in these extracurricular activities, for them doesn't give a sense of belonging. For them, it might be their family community back home if they're an international student, or it might be their church group on the weekends if they're particularly religious. They find that the university environment isn't really what they define as belonging. It's something outside that university environment. And I think both views are valid and both views can be enabled. And if I were to summarize it in one word, I think it comes down to opportunities. It's about providing students with as many opportunities as possible, giving them the incentive and the encouragement to take advantage of these opportunities if they so want, but not necessarily forcing them or making them feel like they have to take part in these opportunities. And I think that's a big part of tertiary education, where it's unlike primary or secondary education where schools may force students into doing weekend sport or force them into doing certain co-curricular activities. Here it's a lot more about your personal and intrinsic motivation, what you really find an interest in. And I think that allows people to become a lot more self-motivated and find activities that are going to be something that they can carry on, throughout their university life, even post-university as well.
Great, thanks. And that really resonates with what Chi was talking about really sort of setting up what's the motivation that students have, providing those opportunities for them to dig into. Fantastic. Belle, you've worked closely with and advocated for international students in a lot of your work, and especially through Future Forte. What are the experiences of belonging and wellbeing that might be different for international students, and how do we need to think of domestic and international students and what they need and want and are after?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this question, and I really like the provocation that Sarah threw in to our briefing meeting. That is, do all students want to belong? And Aidan painted such a good picture, I think, for a lot of domestic students. So for my sharing, I'll start with a bit of data and evidence, and I'll go into more lived experience stories there. So in my work at Mind Tribes, we did a piece of large data collection through listening sessions with diverse student groups, including a lot of international students around their experience at university. And for a lot of them, it actually took them, so we run 90-minute sessions. It usually takes me 45 minutes to an hour to frame the conversation so that they feel actually safe enough to share their experience. So that's, the number one question to everyone is that really, do international students feel safe in sharing their real experiences in surveys or focus groups? So that's, the caveat with a lot of data collection and analysis that I'll post. So in terms of the findings in the facilitation, because I can bring a lot of my lived experience into it, so I think we managed to get really nuanced data from that qualitative piece. We found that for international students, the experience of inclusion, and we use inclusion framework to code that data that is evidence-based. We look at voice, visibility, perceived fairness, agency and empowerment. So the experience of exclusion would be the lack of these elements. For international students in general, across the board, they score much lower compared to other domestic students. So you can think about voice and visibility. International students find that intrinsically, being in a foreign country, and that flows onto agency and empowerment as well, which is quite a holistic experience. And when it comes to belonging, in our work, we define belonging as an outcome measure. So it is an outcome measure of a number of things, including everyday sense of inclusion. So if a student doesn't feel included in the classroom experience day-to-day at a university, we can't ask them to have a sense of belonging within the university just through one event. For example, it is an outcome of that everyday consistent experience of inclusion and equity. Now, bringing to a little bit about lived experience, and I think Aidan mentioned this as well, for a lot of international students, the sense of belonging can be different. It can be to your own diaspora, your national diaspora, people from your same nationality. It can be with the international student community. It can be with a university. It can be in Australia. So I think a lot of students do want to feel also a sense of belonging and feel welcome in Australia, so much more beyond the university confinement. The contrast to that is that some students actually over time feel a reduced sense of belonging with their communities back home. So that's also an interesting point to consider as well. How does that impact students' well-being if they feel isolated from their home country? And the impact, I won't repeat what the previous speakers have already spoken about so nicely, but the sense of belonging, we see that for international students, because a lot of us don't have friends and family and existing networks here already, the lack of belonging does impact your mental health, isolation, where to seek help, all through your classroom experience, even your English proficiency, whether you can feel safe and comfortable and free to speak English and impacts your career outcome as well. So it can be a really holistic.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And I think it ties to what Sarah was saying, that your sense of belonging changes over time, but thinking about international students potentially feeling more connected to Australia while they're here, but as a consequence less connected to their home country. Have you seen good, what can we do about that? What can we assist in that way? Is it just about acknowledging it, or do you think there's a role universities can play in supporting international students through that?
Yeah, I personally think that one of the ways to really do that is by doing culturally responsive both curriculum and student support. A lot of the disconnect that students feel can be that, one of the key source of disconnect that students can feel is that the values that are very, prominent or celebrated here in Australia could be counter to where they come from and their culture. I'll use an example. The individualism here is quite counter to some of the collectivism culture that we have back home. And I think taking the culturally responsive way to, everything that the university does, student support, curriculum, etc., goes some way to fostering that understanding so that students don't have to choose, it's one way or another, west or east, for example.
Fantastic, thank you. So Aidan, you kind of talked about the student experience more broadly, and we understand, we've heard from lots of speakers today, that it really covers all aspects of the student's life. And if I ask our audience members what does student experience mean, their answers will differ depending on what their function is at the university. So thinking of it in terms of sort of curricular inside the classroom, co-curricular alongside, and extracurricular for the rest of student life is often a good way to kind of think about that. And each of us can kind of play in a different space, but for the student, they're covering all of those areas. So I suppose my question is, we do offer, and all universities offer, a really wide range of activities and initiatives, but without it being disrespectful question, are we kind of praying and spraying, or spraying and praying, and just doing all sorts of things out there? And we heard Chi sort of talk about how do we maybe focus our resources on what really matters. So where's kind of the evidence base of what's really working? And maybe the answer is going to be everything, or it depends on what it is. Thinking, Gary, you're really focused on sort of classroom, and a lot of your research is around what happens inside the classroom and assessment. You're an advocate for SWAG and student wellbeing action groups, and part of the Healthy Universities initiative. Do you want to talk to us about your take on student experience, belonging and wellbeing inside the classroom?
Thanks, Sarah. So I guess I'm coming at it from the point of view of my experience in medicine and health over many years. And for many years we've run a student experience questionnaire called MedSec, which covers the entirety of our 6-year cohort. And a factor analysis of that, the outcomes of that survey, shows that the best correlate with overall student experience is a perception of being cared for. So that's not difficult to do, but it's in an era where higher education is massified, where there's very large student to staff ratios, it becomes more difficult to do it inside the classroom. But I think the story that Sarah Bendel told about her one lecturer who made that connection is very instructive. Just having one person at the university, whether it's a peer, or whether it's a member of academic staff or professional staff, who makes that connection with a student can make all the difference. So it's not big initiatives that necessarily will make the difference, but it's just little things. It's academics taking pastoral care as an important part of our work. And that was always the case when I was a young person, which was many years ago. But it's become less of a focus in academia because of the increasing workloads. But I think that's got to become a focus of just focus on the students in front of you. They're all individuals with with diverse needs, and if you show that you care, you will make a difference. In terms of what we can do at a higher level, for some years I've been concerned about the impact of assessment on student wellbeing. The way we currently do it is often just to certify that a student has ticked the boxes, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to their learning, but it does contribute a lot to distress, to burnout, and sometimes to mental health disorders. So changing the way in which we frame assessment, perhaps ungrading has been suggested in first year, perhaps taking a more program level approach to assessment. We don't need to assess the same things in course after course after course. Maybe that may reduce the burden on both students and staff. I think those are important things to think about.
Thank you. And Aidan, from a student perspective, and we also heard from the student panel earlier today, and they were kind of all focused, I suppose, primarily on the extracurricular side, on the sort of social side and the connections that they had there. And they talked a bit about if a student was in a professional degree, then students usually went through their courses or their degree program in cohorts, whereas if you're in a more generalist degree, you're kind of a bit more mixed. So can you maybe talk to us a bit about, you know, what SWAG does, and understanding from your perspective that you've got students that do want to join in, those that might be, we also heard from the students who are a bit overwhelmed, there's a lot, they can't find information, and how do we kind of reach out to students inside the classroom if we think they're feeling isolated?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack there. So in terms of, I guess, a brief overview of SWAG, we have 4 different subgroups, each targeted towards their own objective, and we try and involve students from across the year groups, so getting students from 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year, 6th year as well, getting some first year perspectives too. And I think that allows us to really provide solutions that can address students at their different phases throughout the medical program or throughout their university life. And when it comes to deciding upon, well, what initiatives are we taking, I think our objective is trying to not only address what students have brought up as concerns, but also try and provide solutions that are going to be available for students who may not be confident speaking up about what their concerns are, or who may not have directly made a complaint about something that they were frustrated about or something that they thought could have been improved. And what works quite well there, I think, is since you have older students involved as well, it really creates an environment where you're able to use their experiences and then improve the situation for younger students. And so one of our subgroups is successful transitions. Not only creating a successful transition from high school life into university life, but even between year groups or between our phases in the medical program, where we have phase 1, 2, and 3, each phase encompassing 2 years. And what we try to do with this successful transitions is we're focused a lot on different mentoring programs that can be available for our students. So I think most university degrees will have a mentoring system for first year students who are coming in for their first term or trimester in the degree. And then we have volunteer students from 2nd year all the way to 6th year who help to make that transition into university life a bit easier. But I think we've tried to take it even beyond that. So something that was mentioned earlier was the hospital buddy system. And it looks at matching students from 2nd year all the way till 6th year. And it has a variety of different functions. So one function is clinical learning, having older students take younger students around the hospital environment, help them integrate into this professional environment and give them some direction in terms of what they can be doing for their own learning. But I think more than that, it helps to connect younger students with older students. And I think that's kind of the most important thing, because you're able to reach out to someone who has gone through what you're about to go through very recently as well, someone who has a lived experience that is extremely similar to your own, and they're able to not only give you academic advice, give you advice about how to best approach assessments or how to best approach your learning, but then also advice on perhaps what special interests could you pursue, what opportunities are available as well. How can you balance academics and co-curriculars and social life and everything else that comes with university. And I can speak from my own experience that this mentoring that older students are able to give you creates a really positive culture. So something that gets mentioned quite a bit in medicine here is a paying it forward culture. The fact that since you have had older students mentor you, take their time without much acknowledgement at all, just to assist you, it really motivates you to then try and pass that down to the next generation. And I think creating that culture is one side of a coin, and the other side is the initiatives that you implement. And I think it creates this two-way street where in order for students to best take advantage of these opportunities, you need to have a culture in place that encourages them to do so and provides them with the motivation to do so. But at the same time, in order to help create that culture, you do need some of these initiatives in place and these opportunities available for students to take advantage of. And it's something that it's almost impossible just to happen overnight. It has been built up, I think, over years and years with our medical society, implementing little things at a time. But I think it's something that we want to continually strive for and continually improve over the years as we have newer students coming in with their own perspectives and their own views, different ways in which we can change our society and provide a more meaningful experience to students to improve their well-being. Even with coming out of COVID, the approach that we've taken to events and the way in which we mentor students has completely changed, but it's changed in a way that targets the new cohort of students who are coming in and make sure that their experience is tailored to what best suits them.
Great, fantastic, thank you. So I heard from Gary in terms of inside the classroom care, which comes for free, though it does take a little bit of time, as well as that kind of rethinking assessment. And I think we've heard a lot of that over the last few years, and especially with the access to generative AI, a lot of staff are rethinking how they do assessment. So they're two sort of critical things. And then Aidan, you talked a lot, I suppose, about peer support and the criticality of peer support and it going both ways, which also speaks to that intrinsic motivation, finding that intrinsic motivation of both the mentor and the mentee, which is great. Julie, I have not forgotten you there. Thank you for your patience. So as well as the student experience, and we've kind of heard it a little bit here, we do often talk about the student voice and the importance of having the student voice across the student experience. And given the diversity of experiences we've already heard about of our students, as well as the diverse cohorts that we have, you argue quite rightly that there's no such thing as the student voice, but indeed there's many voices. You also talk about intersection, which matters, which I suppose we've talked about here. And just to sprinkle in for the audience, you've talked a little bit about ducks and fish. Would you like to share your ducks and fish story with us? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for having me. I think it's really important that we recognise that students don't come in particular sort of shapes and sizes, that we don't assume that all students within a particular demographic group are the same. And this is something that through all the work that I've done is really clear. So universities tend to try and look for answers around how do we support particular groups of students. So I know when I came to visit UNSW a few years ago, there was lots of thinking about how do we support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students within the university sector. And that's great, and it's really good that we're thinking about those big picture questions. But actually, not all students within a particular demographic group are the same. They're not homogeneous groups. And sometimes, because of things like intersectionality, just because of individual differences, what we try to do for a particular group may not work. So, for example, I came to university as a mature student with a baby. I was a single parent for much of my university years. And I couldn't come to all of the events that were put on for students, the sort of extracurricular stuff, because I had to get home to a child. And so when we're thinking about diverse students and student voices, we really need to be thinking about what is it that affects particular students. And some work that I did with Professor Naomi Winston from the University of Surrey, we talked to students, we did mixed methods, we did some quantitative work looking at student confidence and student expectations around what they were studying, but we also did some qualitative work looking at their experience of transition, particularly into first year at that point. It was a few years ago. And the thing that seemed to matter most was that students, as Gary said, felt cared for, but also that they could find someone else like them. So they could feel safe. I really liked what Belle was saying about cultural responsiveness. And I think cultural responsiveness goes beyond just our culture associated with our country of origin or our sort of upbringing, but also goes to things like neurodiversity, disability. How can we be ourselves? And often we find that by finding a story of another student who may be just like us, or a staff member who may be just like us. And so thinking about how can we share stories, how can we share narratives that are quite individual. It's not about, we're going to take a student with a particular ethnic origin and team them up with another student of particular ethnic origin, or we're going to do interventions for those groups, but rather that we share stories and that students can hear about others who have maybe trodden the same path before them. So I think the swag work and the mentoring that Aidan was talking about is really valuable, because it does allow a student to say, this is what happened to me, and it was okay, and this is how I coped with it. And I think finding those opportunities through mentoring, but also informally, maybe through sharing kind of little narratives on websites and things like that, allows people to see that, someone like me did this and they got through it and it was okay. And I think when we talk about what do we mean by belonging, often we think about these kind of big sort of levels of belonging that Belle was talking about. Do I belong to my tutorial group? Do I belong in my accommodation? Do I belong in my course, to my discipline, to my university, to my nation? But actually, I think sometimes it's just about feeling that we can be seen as we are, and that that's safe and we're cared for and we're valued. So I think that the ducks and fish idea was that some students take to university like a duck to water. And so they arrive and they swim and they splash about and they have lots of fun. Some students are like fish out of water, so they arrive and at some point they start to struggle and they feel like they're in the wrong place. They don't feel that sense of belonging. They don't feel safe. They're feeling like they're having to fight to stay alive. And as Gary was saying, that kind of over-assessment can be a really big part of that we're putting them under stress, and that, they're struggling to cope with that. So, but it's not always predictable. So we often think about, this group of students will struggle and this group of students will be fine. But actually, it's not always the case that, for example, the white middle class student does absolutely fine and the lower socioeconomic status student or the ethnic minoritized student struggles. So I think we need to recognise the diversity of students, not only between these different demographic groups, but within them.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so then if you take that to the next level, there's lots of activities that are going on at the university to support this really diverse group of students. Do we need to do a zillion do we need to do loads of different programs in the curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular to support all of those multiplicity of demographics and needs that students have? Like, how do we know what's going to work or where to focus our efforts?
I think the things that Aidan was talking about and also the things that Gary was talking about are really important. What we're doing is we're creating a safe environment, and a lot of that has to be within the classroom, because not all students are able to engage with extracurricular things. So if you, like me, you're a parent, you've got to get home to those children. If you're a carer, often for students from different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, there's family responsibilities that have to be undertaken that, you know, it depends whether they're living at home still or whether they've moved to university, but there's lots of different things that can be going on. And I think we tend to sort of assume that students are, you know, they're living on or near campus, they've got, their student life is their life. And actually, increasingly in the UK, we're seeing that students are working full-time alongside full-time studies. They're working, you know, very long part-time hours. They've got other responsibilities and other commitments. And I think it's really important that we start by saying the place where all our students are is in the curriculum. Yeah. And so if we're creating a system and a structure where that curriculum feels safe, where they feel seen, they can see themselves in the curriculum, so the curriculum is relevant to their lives, and relevant to, you know, meaningful to them in terms of their future aspirations. So increasingly here in the UK, we're talking about belonging and becoming. So not only talking about where we are now and feeling safe, but looking to the future and seeing where we're going to be and our aspirations, and being able to see that in the curriculum as well. I think that feeling cared for, feeling safe, and being allowed to be who we are, not having to mask, whether that's neurodivergent masking or whether it's cultural masking, trying to fit in, trying to be something that we're not. That's the thing that really matters, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you. And I think we heard that this morning as well in the quilt data, that connection inside the classroom, the curricular activities seem to have the strongest connection back to sort of sense of belonging within the discipline. But I might ask a slightly more controversial question now then to any one of the panel who would like to answer. Just thinking about that, like you guys making it sound so easy, like all we need to do is in the classroom, just be nice to all of our students, just be really inclusive. You guys can do that, right? It's really easy to do. You've got however many students you have in your class. So I mean, I suppose from a controversial view of that might be, you know, society does get more, or it can feel like it gets more divided as time goes by, and we've got groups of people that are really pushing for unity and understanding, etc., and we've got other people that are really pushing for individualism. And so we hear a lot, certainly in the media, about everything is woke. I don't even know what woke means, but we hear that a lot, right? So are these social issues just woke issues? Like, we don't need to worry about that. Our job is to educate these students, not to worry about this other wishy-washy belonging stuff. Now, obviously, if you're here at this summit, you don't believe that, but you might believe that you're a pretty exhausted academic and that there's a lot that you need to take care of in the classroom, another thing added on. So for any members of the panel, what does it mean in the classroom? You know, Gary, you talked about sort of, you know, demonstrating care. How easy is that to do if you've got if you're still lecturing and you've got a lecture of, you know, hundreds of students, or that you're the convener over thousands? So what are some of the sort of practical ways that we can bring some of that into the classroom?
Thanks, Sarah. It's clearly not easy. The bigger the class size, the more difficult it is. I think one of the strategies in terms of curriculum is to ensure that while there may be a call for lectures as part of the curriculum, there is an opportunity for small group learning where those connections can be made, and there can be a more longitudinal relationship between staff and students. And that I think is a very important part of forming that connection and that belonging. So I think part of it comes down to curriculum design, but it also requires effort on the part of academics to learn students' names. That's as simple as that may sound, that does make a difference. And also to get to know students. They had not socially to get to know them, but to know them as learners, to know what their individual needs might be and to try to adjust to those needs.
Sarah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, no, I'm listening to this and nodding my head because it is those really small gestures that make such a huge difference, and particularly to our equity cohorts, you know, so to students that are from more diverse backgrounds. So for many of these students, you know, just getting through the gate, getting through the door, getting to the Zoom room at university is a huge achievement. But their sense of being an imposter is very high. And so it can take very small things that will make or break their university journey. And I think name is so important. And I'm reminded of the work that Peter Felton has done around relentless welcoming. And he talks about how we need to get into the habit of relentlessly welcoming our students, which actually means knowing their name or maybe asking how are they. You know, I think it makes an enormous difference to a student's, you know, relationship with an institution.
Thank you. I remember when I first arrived at UNSW, it was sort of just at that post-COVID stage, and our yellow shirts, which are the students that welcome all of the other students, they had this campaign of relentless welcome, and I have to say I found it an exhausting expression, but the students I think really loved it. Belle, do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I don't have too much to add in terms of the practical side, but I recently, in one of our consultation, heard from a really thoughtful person who shared that, well, in our work, we deal with a lot of identity-based issues when it comes to exclusion, discrimination, etc. And of course, that touch into global conflicts as well and the impact on local communities. And one of the things that came up was that for a lot of people, we even within university spaces, we seem to have lost the ability to distinguish between lack of safety and discomfort. So a lot of people tend to say, you know, I feel unsafe in this environment, when in fact they mean I feel uncomfortable. And I think that how do we, I don't have the answer in terms of how do we make that distinction, you know, in all of the different scenarios, but I think it's important for us to be able to hold a space where there may be discomfort, but do that in a way that, is I think conducive to conversations and discussions and exchange.
Thank you. I think that one is super important, and certainly over the past, I suppose, 18 months we've had, you know, a lot of external things going on across the world that are making their way into the classroom and onto campuses. We've also got psychosocial safety, which is the new expression that everybody's using all the time. But I think your point of unsafe versus uncomfortable and really talking about and calling out those differences. And I think we also heard from Chi earlier about challenging students, which is really what we're all here to do, to challenge them to grow. And there might be some discomfort, some uncomfortable conversations that need to happen as we have different views and perspectives inside the classroom, and that's okay. Julie, do you want to add something there? Yeah,
please. I think this point about actually facilitating discomfort sometimes is really important. And thinking about those student voices and those connections within the classroom, one of the things that I do, and it ties in with what Gary was saying, is really to think about where can students be authentic and actually bring their experiences to the classroom, so that rather than problematizing diversity, we see diversity as a source of richness and a source of learning that all of us can learn from. And so actually having opportunities for students to share their lived experience in class. For my subject of psychology, that's quite easy, because we can talk about, you know, kind of how they feel that they fit with some of the psychological theories that we're talking about and things like that. But actually being really authentic myself, sharing some of who I am, not the, you know, really personal details, but just being myself and sharing that, but also having that conversation with students that actually this this class is a place where we will talk about diversity. This class is a place where sometimes you may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay, because we will learn from this. And when you graduate, you will be working with people who are diverse, and you will need to be culturally responsive, and you will need to be sensitive to other people's needs. That, for me, is really important. And certainly I've had feedback from students on my teaching that where they've had those opportunities, they've emailed me afterwards to say I felt seen. They've emailed me afterwards to say I learned from, the other students so much, and that was really important. And if you just stood at the front and talked at me, I wouldn't have got this. So I think it's a really important thing to do, to actually see our students as part of the learning and teaching process, not just the recipients of our knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. I might shift gears again, because Sarah just mentioned something before about online. So, and we heard from Ben Rimmer this morning this conversation about how universities create a sense of belonging while students are navigating that current mix that we all have of online learning, on-campus learning and engagement, and hybrid. The university, as Cord also calls this out, noting that universities often focus on building belonging either on campus only or online only, but a lot of what's happening is hybrid, and how is that impacting on students? I might ask Aidan first, as a student, and if I get your years right, did you start in 2019 or 2020?
2021, I think.
Okay,
fifth year now.
Rightio. So what's your take on the sort of merging of online, on campus, and and how to create a sense of belonging across the two? And do you think it has an impact for students?
That's a very difficult question. I think if you compare online to in-person, I think there is definitely a much bigger sense of belonging when you're in person as a student compared to when you're online. I think if you're joining any kind of university, like lecture or tutorial or activity online, you're normally going to be alone at home tuning in, versus in person, you're surrounded by your colleagues, you're surrounded by your friends, and you just end up becoming, I think, a lot more engaged. Especially when you're in person, it almost forces you to focus more on what you're actually learning. And I find from my own experience, I like the in-person activities a lot more. I find them a lot more engaging. I find myself learning a lot more from them. But at the same time, I think I do have to acknowledge that a lot of other students have very different experiences to me. Perhaps they're working during the day and they're not able to make it in time for an in-person class and they have to join online. Or perhaps they have other activities going on as well. And I think that online option is kind of a nice bridging point where perhaps they aren't getting that same sense of belonging, but at least they're still able to join the class to get some semblance of belonging, even though it may not be to the same extent as joining in person. And I think that's really important because it's kind of a middle point between idealism and pragmatism, where ideally I think everyone would be getting the most out of every activity and everyone would be together, and after class you can go out for a bite to eat, or you can catch up, maybe do a study group together, things like that. But practically that's not always going to be possible, and I think the hybrid or the online option provides that kind of middle ground.
Sarah, would you like to add to that? Because different universities certainly have different approaches.
Yeah, I was listening to Aidan and thinking about some of the students that I've sort of interviewed and worked with over the years, and particularly around the COVID piece. I know I was doing a project on career development learning for students with disabilities, so I was actually talking a lot with students that identified as having a disability, and for them they found the move to online incredibly welcoming, and in fact for them it actually made them feel like they did belong. So I think that points that really, I know you're nodding your head, I think it points to the fact that this is such a nuanced term, that what is belonging, or we might perceive as being belonging for one cohort, and that's where we have to be so careful about not putting sort of unintentionally a particular lens on belonging. So that's what I was thinking through in my mind. Yeah,
great, thanks. And Belle, during the pandemic, a lot of international students well, in Australia, of course, was a disaster, but, being online gave international students a bit more time to respond sometimes. So for some international students, it made more of a sense of belonging or connection, but for others it won't have. So what was your experience with international students during that time?
Well, there was certainly a period of time that I'm reluctant to think back to too often.
No trauma for people, sorry.
Yeah, I was an international student rep during a period of time, and it was a very, very, very stressful period. I think for international students, the issue of accessing online actually, it's a bit of a bygone era issue now, but as you know, international students' tuition fee is sky high, and the face-to-face classroom experience is actually a big part of choosing to study abroad. So if I were to study online, I probably wouldn't have opted for an expensive Australian university. Yeah. So that was what we hear from a lot of students, but universities didn't give them the option to tuition fee refund was a huge problem at the time, and a lot of them didn't necessarily want to defer. So it was not a good situation for most people.
What if I change the conversation? What about if we think of the situation now?
Yeah.
So there's absolute freedom for the choice and where you move, but a lot of universities are offering hybrid to some way or another, whether it is within an individual subject. There might be components that are on campus and components that are online. And I think what we heard from Ben Rimmer this morning is that the department has some concerns about online only, even though certainly there's universities and learners that is their preferred mode of learning, but it seems to be the hybrid nature that students are grappling with. And Aidan, you also mentioned that there's some flexibility of being able to do some things online, but for different people thinking the on-campus experience is different.
Yeah, I think flexibility certainly is the word, word of the year, word of the decade there. That give. I'm thinking particularly about international students, similar to domestic students who have to work in order to support themselves. So that would be a welcome experience as well. I do want to touch on. Also mindful of time, I do want to touch on, in terms of the classroom experience, I wonder, I don't have the data, it might be too premature to analyze the data, but I wonder if a factor that drives students to withdraw from classroom experience, one of the factors would be exclusion and racism and discrimination. So I do want to talk a little bit about racism while we are on the topic of student inclusion and well-being and belonging. And it is timely to have this conversation. I think the sector and Australia at large has been shying away from this topic because it makes people again uncomfortable. But it is timely given the Australian Human Rights Commission is doing the racism at university studies, and at the moment we are also working with a number of universities to reconsider what it means in Australia. So in fact, a lot of the research that we look into came out of the US, but within Australia there's the colonization and the First Nations conversations, and then the waves of different waves of migrations as well. So within that context, we look into the experience of international students, and we found that one of the issues that I think even people in this room may not be always attuned to is the power dynamic that students experience in the classroom and at universities. We like to think that all of our lecturers and our tutors are certainly good people and nice people, but often without understanding the power that you actually hold in that classroom, and even structurally when you're grading, when you're giving opportunities, when you're interacting with students, a lot of the exclusion actually we see that students tell us, it comes from the educators' decisions and their behaviors, and it actually leaves quite a lasting harm on students, on international students in particular. And with the power dynamics, we are seeing that there's also the peer-to-peer domestic students don't want to be in a group work with international students, those kind of things. But also embedded structurally, we've talked about curriculum earlier, pedagogy, student services. A lot of those structures and processes were built that with a Western-centric and Eurocentric idea in mind, and structurally we see that exclusion at work as well. So just want to raise all of this, finally, well, who can forget about all the visa issues? Nationally, it is a discrimination, and that doesn't stop at university. When students go into employment, I look at the Lisa's nodding there in the Quilt survey, we see that students experience, international students and domestic students are similar. Sometimes international students rate it higher, but outcome in terms of employment, international students are just so way behind, and it is a combination of factors, and many of those relate to discrimination and racism.
Yeah, thank you. I need to just ask my colleagues over here, when that gets to 10, do we need to move to questions, or am I allowed to go to 0 for it? No, I need to, okay, great. In a few moments, everybody, I'm going to start looking at the Slido questions. So if you've got some, please whack a few questions in. But I've got a last question for all of our panel members, and I'll actually start with you, Belle, given that you left us with a problem, so I'm going to ask you for a solution. Well, no, you don't have to come up with it yourself. But the question for all of the panel members is, what part of what these higher education summits are about is actually giving all of our audience members and our community hot tips, practical actions that they can take home and do. So a final hot tip from everybody, a practical action that to boost student wellbeing, sense of belonging, either inside the classroom or out, and possibly at scale, but we also know some people freak out about scale, so I don't mind which. But Belle, any hot tip from you?
Yeah, happy to start. I think there are, certainly pockets of really good initiatives. What we are seeing when we are working with universities and looking through, reviewing the activities, is that a lot of those are not linked to the leadership and governance and even the operations of the university. It is a structural and systemic issue. I think we do need to elevate to that level. So it's great to see the leaders in this room today and hopefully online. In terms of hot tip, given that I just finished up talking about racism, perhaps examine how it may be embedded in your area of practice. I think it's timely to look into that, and it is all around us. So don't be afraid of really looking in the eye. That's how we can. That's the only way that we can address it.
Thank you. And we did have a conversation at the table which had the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, and whether you could use that framework of Universal Design for Learning, thinking about breaking down racism at university. So that's your homework. Julie, so that you don't get left last, please, a hot tip from you.
Thank you. I think listen more than you talk, and that for a teacher, a university lecturer, is not an easy thing to do, but actually seeing your students as contributors of knowledge, not only recipients of knowledge. So creating opportunities within the curriculum. And even if it's just, I've taught up to 700 students in a class at a time, even if it's just encouraging them to talk in pairs for 2 minutes in your class, give them that opportunity to share their knowledge, because that actually helps to decolonise, because it's allowing the different perspectives into the room and valuing them.
Thank you, and absolutely correct. Students in our classroom are contributors of knowledge, and I think I've heard Patsy say before, she learns as much from her students as she tries to teach her students, so that's a great one. Thank you. Sarah?
I suppose from my perspective, and again with the equity lens, I think it's to be authentic. So, we're at a point now where I generally, a lot of work I do with students who are first in the family to come to university. And when I talk about my work, I usually ask, how many people in the room are first in family? And hands go up. And I think, well, why aren't we sharing this with our students? Because what that does is that, number one, it gives them a sense that they're not alone, that maybe they do belong in this space. And the other thing is really important, again, from an equity perspective, is to normalize help-seeking behaviors and deconstruct that hidden curriculum. You know, we use language in universities that really no one outside the university understands. You know, I still don't understand why we refer to the census date, for example. You know, why can't we deconstruct our language, make it more simple? And if we can't, then we need to provide explainers and really make sure that everyone is starting at least on a fairly level playing field.
Great, thank you. Gary.
Thanks, Sarah. Along the similar lines to Julie of listening to students, I think SWAGs are an example of listening to students at a program level. We now have them in all of our undergraduate programs in medicine and health. It would be great if we could have a university SWAG committee where we have Belinda's area, we have your area, we have Leah Hill's area, and each of the faculties coming together with partnering with students to address big issues in student wellbeing.
Great, thank you. And the last word from our student. Tell us, Aidan, what we need to do.
I think everyone here would agree today that students are not one homogenous group. Yep. There's so many different subdivisions and so many different experiences of each individual student. And I think because of that, there's never going to be one individual solution that's going to assist students, but rather it's providing a range of different solutions that can then be drawn upon depending upon the individual's desires and their own experiences. So for example, Professor Villan was talking about pastoral care, and that being one option. And for some students, reaching out to an academic or a faculty member is what they feel most comfortable with. But for other students, it might be reaching out to an older student, a mentor. They feel more comfortable doing that. Or for another group of students, it might be reaching out to the mental health services that are provided by the university and talking to a professional in that sense. So I think providing all those avenues really helps you kind of target as many students as possible and make sure that you're not kind of viewing students just one single body, but you're really treating them as individuals and acknowledging each one of them.
Fantastic, thank you. Please join me, everybody, in thanking Julie, Sarah, Gary, Belle and Aidan. I do have a couple of questions here. So social cohesion has become a challenge at universities in the last few years. This is something we aren't, and I'm assuming this is from an academic, we aren't trained or prepared for. So how do we address this? You don't need to take that one if you don't want to. An academic? Is it just a bit of care? No, something else? Gary, Sarah?
I think respectful dialogue is very important, listening is very important, and kindness is probably the most important thing.
Mm. Yeah.
What about Belle's safety versus discomfort? Like, is that part of the conversation around social cohesion to sort of say that?
Well, yeah, I was going to follow up on from Belle because I really like that, and it reminds me of Cook Sather, who talks about brave spaces. So often in teaching and learning, we talk about safe spaces, but actually we need to be curating brave spaces because you have to take risks in this world. So we need to be teaching our learners how to take risks, but doing it in a supported way. So yeah, I just when Belle was talking about it, I thought, yeah, brave spaces.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's going to help the question and asker if to just be brave. Julie, did you want to add something?
Yeah, one of the things that Student Minds in the UK talks about a lot is the need to have whole university approaches to mental health and wellbeing, and I think it's really important. It ties in a lot with what Belle was saying about, you know, systemic factors, and I can see you nodding, Belle. It's about saying, actually, if we want to have healthy universities, mentally healthy universities, then we need to be thinking about the interconnections between all of us. And actually, if we're not looking after our academic staff and our professional services staff and our students and our estates staff and everybody, you know, we're all in it together. Yeah. And I think it's about thinking about how the university structures and systems are inclusive to staff, how staff are supported, how they're enabled to belong, how they're empowered. Can they access CPD? So in psychology, we often find that we're teaching about quite sensitive topics. So we might be teaching about attachment to parents, and we've got care experienced students in our classroom, or maybe the academic staff member is care experienced themselves. You know, how do we cope with that? And there needs to be support structures for staff as well. So I think we need to not look at students in isolation, but we need to think about how we are all connected, because if we're not looking after our staff, how can we expect our staff to look after our students? So that's not an answer for an individual academic, but it is really throwing it back to you at UNSW and all the university leadership teams to say, how are you addressing that?
Yeah. I'm going to come to you in a sec, Belle, because I can see you want to answer, but the next question actually might help provide a bit of extra context, which is for Aidan, and it says, can you provide a real example from your experience where an educator has created a safe and inclusive environment?
Yes, I think for me, it came last year during my research year, where kind of things were falling apart. Research wasn't really going the way I expected. And I think a lot of what I was being told was, this is just part of the process. This is something you need to kind of suck up and, you know, get over it, keep going, keep pushing forward. But then I was able to speak to a faculty member who I think just acknowledged that what I was going through was quite a difficult time. They were able to acknowledge that, hey, this is quite a tough situation that you're in. And I think for me, having someone just vocalize that and say that what I was feeling and what my thoughts were valid, and they weren't just unfounded feelings. That was, I think, such a relieving experience, because it made me feel like, okay, I'm not just being a hypochondriac, or I'm not just overreacting to this situation. And it helped me, I think, really reassess the situation, approach it with a much calmer mindset, and then being able to work with them, and them just taking maybe 10, 15 minutes out of their day to say, here are some possible solutions that you can have, here are some people you can reach out to. That meant the world to me, and it actually, I think, saved my year, saved my entire research year.
Excellent. So that I'm hearing you were listened to, you felt heard, which
Exactly.
is also what Sarah said. And then I'm just going to say a small joke that I thought all medical students become hypochondriacs at some stage during their careers. Belle, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you. I saw that the counting down, it was like a bomb ticking.
She's here hassling us, so you get the last word. Go for it.
Okay, I'm just going to, following on from what Julie said, absolutely empathize with the person who asked that question. I just want to mention three things quickly that I think actions that we typically recommend. Firstly, leadership from university or universities' leadership. We're seeing that universities' leadership are really quiet in most cases, and people, the staff and student community need to build that trust with that university leadership there. We're not saying pick a side, but you need to make a stance. What are you standing for? That's number one. Number two, educators, who are facing these large student cohorts need support, resources, education training, guidelines, whatever you name it, need clarity about what to do in these cases. And number three is that we're seeing that there's a very, very low trust for students and staff who experience these things to report, or sometimes universities sometimes feel like we don't really want to know their complaints because we don't know how to handle them. We're doing a project at the moment with the university to really map out all of those and understanding students. People sometimes just need a place to voice their concerns and know that it's being heard, and that goes some way to fostering safety.
Amazing, thank you. A big thanks to all of our panel. Thanks very much, everyone.
So thank you very much to all of our panel members, our panel facilitator, Sarah. What I got from this discussion, which was very dynamic, insightful, was that care is important. 6 weeks are not enough to transition into university life. Providing opportunities and finding a mentor or peer support person. The idea of nuanced data for inclusion, voice visibility, perceived fairness, empowerment and agency are important. The idea of many voices, and we learnt a bit more about ducks and fish and the differences between all of us, actually, in our experience. The idea of safe curriculum and belonging and becoming, very important concepts. And also the idea of facilitated discomfort. So that brings me to the point where I think our community here at UNSW have facilitated comfort or have facilitated a reduced anxiety in coming together and producing something that is just such a supported event, so well organised, supported by our DVCs, Merlin, Sarah, who co-hosted the whole event, sponsors the event, Dorota, Remy, Laura, Elise, the team, fantastic. Thank you so much for all your help. And really the table facilitators who worked really hard to facilitate the conversation at each of our tables. I think this is a true example of community at a university, and I'm very proud to be here. And with that, I'd like to close our summit for this year. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And without leaving out the most important bit, the tail end of the whole event, which is more more refreshments and snacks and talking. And if you like to head back to your tables, you're very welcome. We're here until 6, so we may as well use the venue wisely. Thank you very much.